Good morning, and it's Bible study time at Calvary Baptist Church. It's the 7th of July, and the year 2024 is half over. Wow, that's kind of amazing, isn't it? Well, we've been looking at promises we can count on, and last week we took a little aside and went to praying for a nation. Hope you've been praying for your nation. And then we now come back to those promises. And by the way, I didn't really say this, but the June 23rd lesson was God promises to make a holy nation. And so then praying for a nation kind of fit with that. If you want to stay in the theme, because it also talked about our country and our world. And anyway, so moving on. Promises of a king. God promises a king to his people. And we're going to look at 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 8 and 9. Now, God had promised Abraham and his descendants that they would be a great nation. And, he also said to them, well, when you get into the land that I am giving you, and you've been there, and then you think, oh, well, we need a king. Why? God said, I am your king. Remember that I am your king. But if you think you have to be like the other nations and desire a king, then go for it. We'll work on that when we get there. And that's not exactly how I said it, but it's kind of the way that he put that together. And so that's what they did. They began to work on that. Come in, Jessica. I'm already started, but you go right ahead. Well, that's okay. And so anyway, so then the first king was Saul, and Saul, he was head and shoulders above the people, and he was really the people's choice. Saul was. He was a great warrior. He was a great man, and but he was a selfish man. He was the way many rulers or kings or dictators or however you want to see it. People in charge. Many of them are extremely egotistic or self-centered or very driven, and so they come across that way even worse sometimes than what they may actually be. So Saul was kind of that way. He wanted to do it his way, and the people wanted him to do it their way, and God allowed that to happen. It didn't end well for Saul or necessarily even for the nation. However, then God said, okay, I'm going to appoint a king, and when he grows up, he's going to be exactly what I envision as a king. And that was David. So David was chosen. You can go back to 1 Samuel and read about the calling out of David and the anointing of David. And anyway, so then when we think about the promise of a king, the promise that God gave to David wasn't just for David to be the king in his anointing, but for David's lineage to be an eternal king, an eternal kingdom. And so that's kind of where they are. And you can divide that promise given to David into two parts, and that's kind of what we're going to do today when we look at this passage. The first being he was an earthly king, and it was promises that were fulfilled in his lifetime. But then the second part of that is that promises he never saw, promises that were fulfilled even after he was gone. And so we'll just dive in. And so in the first section, 2 Samuel 7, 8 and 9, verses 8 and 9, we see that God is at work. Let me read that to you. So now this is what you are to say to my servant David. This is what the Lord of armies says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, to be ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone. I have destroyed all your enemies before you. I will make a great name for you, like that of the greatest on the earth. So, God is at work, and just kind of unpack this a little bit and see what's in here. You think about David, and David was a warrior king, but he was also a very sensitive king. And the scripture tells us often that he was a man after God's own heart. He was one who really desired to honor God with his life. He had a real connection to the Spirit of God, and he lived that way. I think that's a great trait. It's the way we all should live. Um, so, uh, if David had put his eyes on his own greatness, would all of this have happened? I don't know. He was so focused on making God great, and however God would use him to do it, and that's what really blessed his life. So, um, service and submission to the Lord is really what He requires of us. Is what He calls us out to be and to do. So, God starts here in verse 8. He says, "So this is what you are to say to my servant David." Oh, by the way, He's doing this through the prophet Nathan. Nathan, of course, the prophet who confronted David in his um, sin with Bathsheba. It was Nathan who stepped up to the challenge and said, "Oh, David, you're the man who stole the sheep, and you're the man who had the shepherd killed, and you're the man who sinned." And David said, "Oh, let's get that guy," and whoever he is. And Nathan had to say, "It's you, King. You're the one." That took a lot of guts. It took a lot of encouragement from the Lord to know that that's exactly where he was headed with that. So anyway, so Nathan is then giving David even more teaching, more understanding in this, because David wanted to build God a house. David wanted to build the temple, and God said to him, "You're a man of war. I would rather that your son Solomon, who will be a man of peace, do that." So he's reminding David then here, this is what I've done for you. This is what I've done for Israel. He says, took you from the pasture. He took David from the pasture. You remember, he was the shepherd boy at Bethlehem. And God called him out of the pasture from tending the flock to rule over my people, Israel. He went from the pasture really to the temple, really to the highest, the throne. He went from the pasture to the throne. So it says that this is what the Lord of Armies says, and we've talked about that term before, Lord of Armies. It's an authoritative term. It's not just that God is, this big militant God who's forcing His will on people. That's what armies do sometimes. But He's the God of armies. He's the one who makes things happen. He's the one who makes all things possible. So He's the commander of the forces. And when you think about the forces, not just being people, but being the whole creation, all the universe, God is the one who commands the forces. He speaks with invincible power. And so that's a great reminder of who God is, isn't it? So then, as I said, he reminds David who he is, what he's done with him, and how he's really taken him into where he is. David wouldn't be there if it weren't for the Lord. Now, stop and think about that a minute. Sometimes we choose and we get ourselves in messes, and we're places where we had not to be. But if anything good happens, it's not because we got ourselves there. It's because the Lord took us there. And we need to trust Him, not trust ourselves, because when we trust Him, we'll always go to the good place. He makes me lie down in green pastures, David said, the psalmist. He restores my soul. So we need to go the places where He's leading or where He's guiding, and trust Him to get us there. He was the one who would make David's name great. And then he uses that phrase, greatest on the earth. Well, that's pretty big, He'll make His name greatest on the earth. Well, name was important to them. It wasn't just an identifier. Your name was your whole reputation. It was who you were, and you better live up to your name. That was their suggestion of their day. And so when He's going to make His name great, He's simply saying that people are going to know who you were down the road. They're going to know who you are. They're going to know who you were. And so then, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Moses, all those along the way, um, all of them were blessed. All of them were blessed because of the blessings of God. And so it was the gift of God that bestowed upon them his greatness. Then he uses that in the future tense. He says, I will make, which means he's going to continue the work even long after David is gone. He's going to continue to make him great. There's more to come in David's life. So that's a good thought, isn't it? We don't know what is in the future for us even after we're gone. I mean, we know what heaven holds to a degree. We haven't been there yet, but the Bible tells us some about it, and also tells us about what hell holds. And Jesus spoke more about hell than he did heaven, like 3-1 is what it was. 2-1, 3-1, somewhere in there. And so, but we do know that if the Lord tarries, doesn't return, the end doesn't come, and we move on, and there are descendants after us, to know that those who come behind us, those who follow us, will be people that will remember us and will continue and carry on the name. I think that's a big thing, being a legacy builder, so to speak. But the legacy is not so much about us as it is about our God. Then we move to the next section, verses 10 and 11. And we see that God will establish people as his own. He's a great God, isn't he? How we doing? We got about 4 minutes. And so it says, I will designate a place for my people Israel and plant them so that they may live there and not be disturbed again. Evildoers will not continue to oppress them as they have done. Ever since the day I ordered judges to be over my people Israel, I will give you rest from all your enemies. The Lord declares to you, the Lord himself will make a house for you. Boy, when you think about all that's happened in the centuries, millennials since David, and you think about all those things, God gave them the promised land. God promised that it could be a dwelling place for them, be a place where there would be peace, a place where there would be blessings. Their enemies would not bother them. Has that happened yet? No, it hasn't happened yet. And I was thinking this morning as I was going back over this, I thought, what's going on over there today isn't over the land. There are so many people who that's only the scope of their vision. That's only as broad as they go, just the land. But it's not the land, people, because Israel has given, they give up more of the land. But when they have had the land, they have made it productive. No one else in the area has. No one else in the area works. Why? Because God's not on their side. Now, think about that a minute. But the Israelites are able to, they are very productive. But the Palestinians in Gaza area, the Muslims in that area, the people in Jordan, the people in Syria, people in Lebanon, all those places around there, even the people in Egypt, to the south, all of them around there have not really done as much for productivity as what the Israelites have done. They don't want the land because they would just take it and they wouldn't work it. They wouldn't do whatever. It's Israel they want destroyed. They want Israel to be destroyed. Why? Because they're jealous of Israel's God. That's the bottom line, folks. They cannot tolerate the fact that, and I don't understand this about a Muslim, and that's why Muslims, when they finally get the truth, they're willing to give it up and they're willing to come to faith in Jesus. It's because they are so driven to believe the lie that Muhammad taught them years and years ago, in 700 AD, that Allah was the same God. Well, he's not. He's the God that Muhammad and his disciples made up. He is not Yahweh, and they can't seem to comprehend that. And their goal is to destroy the Jews. Why? Because the Jews have, so they think, the wrong view of God. And the Jews believe history and the Bible prove that their view of God is correct. Matter of fact, as a believing Christian, I believe the same, that my view is correct, and prayed multiple times, God, if I'm wrong, show me. But I can't believe that Allah would be so destructive and so hateful. And so that's not God to me. That's a man-made God. And Yahweh, he's everything that man can't be, and even more so. So God appoints his king over the kingdom. That's the last thing. Did I get all that? I didn't really go through that passage very well, but we're going to run out of time in about a minute and a half. So 2 Samuel 7 is the last point, and that is God will do the appointing. When your time comes and you rest with your ancestors. Now, this is the future part, isn't it? When you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up after you your descendant, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will discipline him with a rod of men and blows from mortals. But my faithful love will never leave him, as it did when I removed it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and kingdom will endure before me forever, and your throne will be established forever. Now, there's a whole lot of stuff in there, but let's see. Is there anything I want you to know for certain? That is, first of all, that when God establishes, when he does the throne of the kingdom forever, I believe God means it, and it's always perpetual. And you can say, well, now, wait a minute. Through history, there's been times when there wasn't a king on the throne. Well, that's possible. But Christianity came out of Judaism, and when a spiritual sense is there, Jesus has always been on the throne, long since there was a Israeli king. He's talking about not an earthly kingdom, but he's talking about an eternal kingdom where one of David's descendants, Jesus, was on the throne. Isn't that good? And Jesus isn't on a throne that we can compare with the thrones of men or the thrones of other nations. He's on the throne of your heart. He's on the throne of your life. And if you have surrendered to him, you understand and you know what difference Jesus can make in your life. So we are out of time. David's throne was established forever, and his kingdom and his throne were exactly what God intended and God set up. And anyway, we don't get to the verses of 18 to 29, 2 Samuel 7, but it's been said that it's one of the most eloquent prayers of the Bible. That when David heard this message from the Lord, he went before the Lord and he prayed. And it'd be good assignment for you to do this afternoon before your Sunday afternoon nap, and maybe read that passage. Okay. God bless y'all. Bye-bye.